Oh, howdy all, grab yourself a drink. It is time for some PathOfExile discussion. Welcome to day 12 of spoiler season for 3.20 and the Forbidden Sanctum expansion. This is likely to be the last day of the daily spoiler season videos. Just before we get into the news though, I'd like to say thank you to people that have subscribed over the past period, and also say an apology to everyone who's made a comment that I've not been able to reply to, because this period is absolutely frantic and I've probably only been able to see about 30% of the comments. But thank you anyway. Today, GGG provided a few teasers of nodes that are on the Atlas, as well as one of the new unique items. This new unique item, Dawnstrider, is being added to the Searing Exarch's drop pool. Now, this is probably going to come mostly at the expense of getting less copies of the shield. I don't think it's going to impact the probabilities of getting the big drops. This is going to drop from both the regular version of the Searing Exarch and also the Uber version. And it's a set of boots with a very singular, narrow focus. This is for melee builds, and this is actually a pretty good set of boots for melee builds. It causes you to only be able to benefit from one Ancestor Totem, but then it does buff that Ancestor Totem considerably, and it comes alongside 30% increased movement speed and a decent chunk of life as well. These boots should make it more fluid to play a melee build, because you won't need to recast your Ancestor Totems as frequently, and also it won't be quite as devastating if one of them dies, because for 4 seconds the effects of it will linger. Do note that this will not stack with the Mastery that provides a 3-second version of this lingering effect. Definitely not something that'll shake the meta up, but definitely something that will be used on a number of builds. Next, you have a number of Atlas nodes that are being added, and Eve of Invasion was mentioned yesterday, so just thought I would quickly mention it in case you missed that video, but more on that in the previous video. It's a medium quality breach node. Paranoid Fixation comes next and is a Delirium themed node. 2% chance for delirious unique monsters in your maps to drop a cluster jewel, 1% for them to drop a Delirium orb. Know that these are absolute numbers, so if the chance was 5% before, this would increase them to 7% and 6%, rather than increasing them to 5.1 and 5.05%. Now, this took a little bit of thinking about. My first thought was, hey, this is perfect with Glacier. However, Glacier is not on the Atlas in 3.20, so that's not going to be an option. Where it is particularly good though, is on any map that natively has 3 bosses, and there's a few of them such as City Square, when used alongside a Torment Scarab of all things. Torment Scarabs add ghosts to the map, and those ghosts are actually unique monsters. You will need to slay them before they're able to possess anything. That tends to happen accidentally in endgame play a lot of the time as well. You would also gain a lot of benefit from doing this in conjunction with Rogue Exiles. You're going to need those monsters to be delirious, and I think that 20% delirious maps is an option here, but I'm not sure that this is a particularly strong strategy. I think it's more of a meme strategy. Torment Scarabs, 20% delirious City Square, and a Rogue Exile themed Atlas. You could make it work. Will it be a good idea? Probably not, but at least it's something silly and fun that you could try. Otherworldly Artifacts comes next. This is one of the new breach clusters. This is being added on top of everything else. And where Eve of Invasion is pretty good, and it is something that I would suggest that you take when you're playing a breach themed Atlas, I think Otherworldly Artifacts is pretty mediocre. This is going to grant you breach blessings once per 200 rare breach monsters you kill. Now, if you're killing 8 rare monsters inside a breach, that's 0.04 blessings per breach on average. That's not a lot, given that all of them except for Chayula are reasonably cheap, and Chayula is not very expensive either. On top of that, breach monsters in your maps have a 100% increased chance to drop a breach unique item. Yeah, this is okay. It means you'll get a couple more skins of the loyal and things like that. I think the main use case for Otherworldly Artifacts, and this is a pretty narrow one, is if you are in solo self-found, and if you're playing a character that is genuinely struggling with the breach bosses, and that it's very important to you that you get a specific breach unique, for example, Hand of Wisdom in action, in order to make your build more functional so you can take down those breach bosses. I don't think there's that many people in that category though. I feel like people with that level of play experience are more likely to be playing in trade enabled rather than in solo self-found, and if you're playing in trade enabled, you can just buy the specific item that you want. I think that in trade, this is definitely a trap. Even though the Ulnatol shield can be worth something early on, it's still going to be very rare from this. So Otherworldly Artifacts, I think, is mostly a bit of a miss. You might take this if you want to go super razor focused on breach, and that'd be something to consider if you're going to be running Gilded Breach Scarabs on every map that you run. But otherwise, I think you take Eve of Invasion and you skip out on Otherworldly Artifacts. Ancient Decay is next, and this is a very, very niche notable that most people are not going to take. Expedition monsters in your map spawn with an additional 20% of life missing. Now, there is a utility for this, and this is if you're playing a damage over time build that is struggling with expedition content. Probably the most likely scenario to encounter this is if you're playing a Corrupting Fever based build. Those builds often have explosions, and so once you start killing a few monsters, You can get a chain reaction that kills a lot of the rest of the packs, but you can struggle to get those chain reactions started. Ancient Decay makes it easier to get to that point, and so that's its niche use case. Whatever the case, I would advise that you probably spec out of this once your character is very powerful. This is an option to consider very early in the league, but something you probably want to spec out of even if you are intending to do a lot of focus on Expedition. And from underwhelming Expedition notables, we move to some pretty impressive ones. Here we have Scratching Up the Ground, A Noble Quest, Lucky Guess, and Rather Not. Now we're going to want to clarify exactly what these do and how they work. Normally there is a bias against getting Danig in Expeditions. I've heard data from different sources. Some people believe it's a 40-30-20-10 bias in favour of Gwenin. So that is 40% Gwenin, 30% Rog, 20% Tujen, 10% Danig. Other people believe that it is a 2-2-2-2-1 bias. So that is 2 in 7 to get any of Gwenin, Rog, or Tujen, and 1 in 7 to get Danig. I don't know which of these two is true or if it's something else entirely, but let's just assume for the moment that it is the 40-30-20-10 bias. If that turns out to be wrong, it doesn't change the final results all that much. If you allocate Rather Not, you change this bias by increasing Rog's chance by 90%, so almost doubling it. So instead of being 40-30-20-10, it then becomes 40-57-20-10. This means that you are now increasing your chances of getting Rog at the expense of getting any of the other Expedition leaders. And that includes Danig, who is the best of the lot. Now, A Noble Quest is exceptionally good, and that's because Danig is just so strong. Danig is, no matter what type of Expedition strategy you're running, he is the best of the lot. And that's because his reroll currencies can grant you all of the other reroll currencies, and they can also grant you logbooks. No matter which of the vendors you're focused on most, you definitely want a Danig Expedition over any of the others. So I think for that reason, you're going to want to take A Noble Quest, even if these small nodes are not very good. We don't yet know what these small nodes are. And then in this situation, you probably want to consider taking Rather Not as well, at least if you have any experience with rod crafting. I did put out a video on rod crafting, which I'll put a link to down in the description below. There is a lot to say on it, so it is a fairly long video, but I do think that it is one of the most lucrative things you can do very, very early into the league. It's not absolutely definitive, and there will be things that people think of that I haven't thought of, because Rog is such a powerful item factory early in a league. But if you're playing in a trade league, Rog is phenomenal, and if you're playing in solo self-found, he has his uses as well. Now, the interesting thing here is that that makes it 3 steps to get to Tujen. Now, taking the Tujen one is okay. I'm just not sure that it's going to be worth 3 points, especially given that increasing the chances of getting Tujen, which is a good thing because Tujen is one of the stronger vendors, is going to decrease the number of Rogs and the number of Danigs you get a little bit as well. Then there's poor Gwenin, who has seen slightly better days in the past. I think that this is going to be one of the least taken notables on the entire tree, up there with increased chances for breaches in your maps to belong to Zoth. Now we come to an interesting one. Here, GGG are only showing off the small notables. I am suspecting that this large node is actually unfinished at the moment, that GGG have some impressive plans for it that they're not sure they're going to be able to get done, and so they're currently leaving this blank, and that may actually be what is holding up the Atlas from being revealed. I could, of course, be wrong. This is purely speculation, but I'm suspecting that this might be tied to... Those of you that do a lot of Blights in maps will know that when you kill a Blight boss, you get an extra reward on that lane. So I think if you take all of these, you're going to end up getting 3 rewards instead of the normal 2. This is only going to be beneficial when you have a Blight boss spawn, but Blight bosses aren't particularly rare, and it means that this cluster is looking fairly solid if you're investing in Blight. Definitely if you're intending to use even a rusted Blight Scarab in every map, then you're going to want to take these nodes. As for what this one does, that is something we might not know until about 12 hours time. And then we have Sturdy Construction, which is one of those nodes, like the Expedition node that causes monsters to spawn with 20% less life, but this is here to make the content a little bit easier. If you are struggling with Blight content, you want to allocate Sturdy Construction. Later, when you've got a more powerful character, you're just going to strip these off your Atlas because they're not going to be doing anything for you. So Blight Towers and their minions in your maps deal 20% more damage. This is a fairly significant deal, and the Ichor pumps in your maps have 100% increased durability, means that you've got more time if you do make a mistake and something breaks through. This is something that I recommend taking as a training node. If you're new to Blight content, allocate Sturdy Construction, use it while you're learning the content, and then once you've mastered the content, pull these points off your Atlas and go and spend them somewhere that will increase your loot. But for early on, you're going to get paid off by having this on your Atlas. Anyways, that's it for the news today. I don't think there's going to be any more announcements until tomorrow morning my time, which is about 3 hours before the league goes live. At that point, the Atlas passive tree is looking like it'll be up, and then there'll be a lot more to talk about. So I'm going to try and set my alarm for very early in the morning and get up and make a video on that when it comes out. May your Varlorbs have interesting results, and I hope you have fun in Path of Exile 3.20.